name is Tom Magrino. We have a very special podcast for you. Obviously, it's Friday, and that means Spoilercast Day. And the game we have this week was brought to our attention by the ever-informative Kevin Van Ord.
Well,
that's incorrect, actually.
That's actually an incorrect thing. We can thank Sean McInnes for turning me on to this.
McInnes. How are you doing, Sean?
I'm good. I'm just trying to get my camera shot a little bit more festive.
So I think I've introduced you, Thomas McShay, Kevin Van Ord. The man I haven't introduced, Vanimal. Van, how are you doing?
Doing good, Tom.
Who are you? Who the hell are you?
Wait, yeah, I don't recognize you either.
What do you do for GameSpot?
I do stuff on the computer.
Okay.
I do content promotion, site production.
So basically, what Van is not saying is he is the guy who puts all those top slots up for you. You know, when you come to the GameSpot.com, you see all the rotating stuff. He does that mostly. So now you know who Vanimal is. I like calling you Vanimal. I don't know why. It's like animal.
I've heard worse.
You've heard worse?
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, we're gonna get to the show. To the Moon is the game of the hour. So I think you all can agree that this game is about cold, calculated science. No? Nothing?
We cannot agree on this.
Oh, okay. What's this game about, Kevin Van Ord?
It's about heart.
Okay.
It's not science.
Cold-hearted science.
Cold-hearted science.
See, best of both worlds. Cold. No,
What?
never mind.
Well, I mean, yes, you've got this story-driven game that kind of couches its story in terms of science. So you've got these two doctors, and their job is to fulfill your dying wish.
Mm-hmm.
And the way they do this is they have this machine that they hook up the dying person to, and then they go into his memories and rearrange things so that his dying wish may come true.
Mm-hmm.
Not in real life, but in his mind.
Right. I mean, it's kind of an interesting question, though, of what is this game about? Because that's kind of the indie element of this game. This is one of the few games that I played ever, really, that has a story worth telling. And I don't know. It's kind of interesting because this is a spoiler cast, so I'm just going to go right into it.
They go to the moon.
They go to the moon.
They go to the moon.
Eventually.
The moon is a place where they go.
Yeah.
Well, they don't actually
Not even
go to
that.
the
I don't know
I
if
mean,
they
they-
actually even make it to the moon.
I mean, spoiler, they don't get to the moon. I mean, even
Don't preface anything.
Yeah, you don't actually need to
Spoiler.
say spoiler.
a spoiler
All right,
cast.
cover your ears.
Remember, this is a spoiler cast. No, but they don't even get to the moon
Right.
as far as we can tell.
Yeah, but I mean, as far as when I say for me, what this game was about, it was about the story of connection and how we connect to people, connect to one another, and the way they kind of highlight this is a man and a wife. You go back through the years, as you said already, and the complication there is the wife has Asperger's, so it's a disease that doesn't allow for normal social interaction. So you would think that she is the one who is unable to connect with, her husband or just the world around her. But in fact, I think it's actually the other way around.
Totally.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the themes of the game to me. Actually, is I mean the way the game is told, it starts in the most recent memories and starts to work its way back. And over time, you learn that River, who is Johnny's wife, Johnny
Right.
is the man whose life that you inspect as these doctors, and you meet River. You see River interacting with Johnny, and River is she's a little less able to communicate emotion in the way that we generally think of people communicating emotion.
I mean, she has the fairly stereotypical robot-like disposition, just the way she talks, the perfunctory nature of her interaction with Johnny and others.
and she's also got compulsive behavior,
Right.
in the sense that we see pretty early on that she's been making these origami rabbits, and hundreds of origami rabbits, and they're just everywhere. They're in the lighthouse, they're in the basement, we see at some point the beginning of that obsession when this huge stack of paper has been ordered, where that sort of begins, and she begins to create these over and over again. And she asks Johnny frequently, what do you see?
Right.
When she leaves him an origami rabbit, and he gives all of the answers but the right ones.
Right.
And it's really interesting because you learn later on in the game why this is the case, but it's really interesting that in her own way, she's trying to pull out information from Johnny, and trying to actually reestablish the connection. And because he's forgotten very important aspects of his young life, he never quite makes that connection. And it's incredible, actually, when after finishing the game and going back and looking at it that way, you realize, this is her way of reaching out.
Yeah, she's expressing love in the only way she knows how.
And he's unable to connect with her that way. And he even says, early on when talking with their friends, he says, I feel like she wants something from me, but I don't know what it is. And it's only later where you really discover what that is, and why the connection is never made. Because it's very ironic. Like, he thinks that the distance is really the product of her being her, when actually he's created this distance himself unknowingly.
Well, I mean,
I think that's, that's, to me, that's one of the greatest parts about this game is the complexity of this relationship that they have. Because when I think of their relationship, I think of just sort of like two lines crossing, basically. Like, they start out not knowing each other, and then they have this one perfect moment where it's basically the only point in the relationship where they're really connecting. It's that moment where they're sitting there stargazing. They're like, they are two as one. And then for the rest of their lives, they're sort of like drifting apart and not really able to communicate and connect with one another. And the whole time, it's obviously River is trying to bring that moment back by folding these rabbits, because the rabbit is, spoiler, is a metaphor for the moon, because it's the one special rabbit that she makes has got the yellow body and the blue limbs. It's the yellow of the moon and the blue of the stars around it. And she's constantly asking him, what does this mean to you? What does this mean to you? And Johnny just can't see it, no matter how hard he tries. And these are two people who obviously care for each other a lot, but they're victims of their own inability to communicate and understand one another. And that's just one of the most powerful things about this game, is just the complexity of that relationship. And, these are two deeply flawed characters, but they try their best, and they just can never quite work it out.
Yeah. I mean, what do you think about the fact that Johnny, it's not really of his own volition that he can't access these memories? What do you think the point or purpose of that was? Or do you have any opinion on that, anybody? Because basically what happened there, as I understood it, was the reason why he can't access these memories or recall this perfect moment, which I feel like is, really what's happening there. Like, that moment happened when they were like 7 years old or something, super young. And the reason why he can't access it is because he had this operation or was inserted with chemicals or...
Well, it's beta blockers.
Beta
blockers,
right.
Yes.
Some scientific medical thing was done to him to block that memory of his brother dying. So it's just kind of interesting that, he couldn't control his ability to access his memories, and she couldn't control her ability to not interact with people in a, socially conforming way.
That's... I mean, isn't though that part of the? I don't know that it's the point of the story, but I think the story basically puts you in a position where you realize how complex the interactions we have are with other people, and how much is sort of out of our control when we really think about it. And it really is about bridging that gap. And there's no perfect answer all the time. We don't always know the reasons why we can't bridge those gaps, or if those gaps can even be bridged at all. But that's sort of part of Johnny's wish. I mean, we learn early on that Johnny wishes to go to the moon. He just doesn't know why he wants to go to the moon. And then it becomes about these, part of the story is these two doctors trying to set up a situation in his past in which he will desire to go to the moon and follow through on that desire.
Just to quickly note real quick, this game, I think we're kind of making it sound like this super sappy, sentimental thing, but the two doctors are hilarious.
Yeah.
They are genuinely funny and make this a very, very entertaining game. Just of that. So sorry.
Yeah. No, totally. And well, we can get into that too. I mean, I could talk about this game all day. I love talking about this game, but going back to the other point, that's part of the thing. It's like the two doctors, they see the gap. As outsiders, they begin to piece together why it is that they have, these two characters have had this emotional disconnect. And part of the purpose, I mean, late in the game, each doctor has a different way of looking at it. One says, we're here to do a job and to make this happen. And the other doctor is essentially, don't you see what we're doing is wrong? We have to, I don't know. This part's hard for me to explain. Maybe somebody else can explain it a little bit better.
Like we can provide the what he's looking for without actually giving him his explicit.
Exactly. One there's the question of like, do we know what's better for Johnny than what his last wish actually?
I mean,
was?
the thing is, his last wish is to go to the moon.
Right.
Right.
And that's like what the contract that was written up is.
Right.
So the female doctor, whose name I'm blanking on,
Rosalind.
She's doing everything to get him to the moon. But he doesn't. I mean, Johnny doesn't want to get to the moon. He wants to connect to River. Like that's what he wants. So
Right,
Watson, the male doctor, is like, he's like, he doesn't want to go to the moon. Like that's not the point of this whole thing. He just wants to find a way to reconnect with his wife. So that was the big conflict between those two.
Yeah. I mean, it's the whole idea that his dying wish is ostensibly to go to the moon, which is what Rosalind wants to achieve. But the whole point is that that's exactly what you said.
Yeah.
Sorry, lost my train of thought.
Well said.
I was going to expand on that, but then whoosh.
I know.
Were you struck by what seemed to be an interesting role reversal between the two doctor characters at that moment? Because looking back, you almost kind of would expect that that Watts, being the maybe the more analytical or the less emotionally inclined of the two.
He seemed to me the guy who would act more on a whim.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that,
whereas
well,
the woman
I guess
seemed
that's
more
true.
thoughtful, but at the same time, she analyzed the situation so quickly that she knew that there was a limited amount of time because Johnny was dying.
Right.
So she didn't have time to talk to him about what she was doing. She just acted.
It was just trust me.
Yeah.
But it was interesting at first because you would almost expect Watts as kind of the wisecracker, as taking on the more objective person of the two, like with less emotional connection to the events that were happening on. It was really interesting that we see that humanity come out in him, the further the game goes along, and I didn't expect to see that coming because if anything, if they were, you almost would have expected the roles to be reversed.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
in a way,
I think that's largely fueled by the fact that kind of the main character. When this is something that struck me immediately, like the main character is a non-white male, and that's kind of playing like when you say that, it makes me think like when you think of a woman, she's supposed to be the one who's caring and able to see like the human element of it, and the man is the one who's supposed to be analytic and kind of detached and just kind of doing the job. Is that kind of fair? Like just the way that they're playing off of these stereotypes?
I didn't think about it that way, but I suppose you could be right that there is a legitimate attempt to humanize these characters by looking at them outside of what you usually assume the gender role is going to be. I hadn't even thought about that.
When I look at the choice the two doctors made, how she was trying to get him to the moon, it just seemed like Rosalind, she was the one who had faith that like things would work out if they're going to work out between River and Johnny, even if she tampered with the past. Well, it seemed like Watts was so hung up on like this idea of love and finding the one person that the idea of separating that apart terrified him, because he was just like, well, they had the one chance they got together and we can't mess with that at all because that is the most important thing to Johnny. And it just kind of like, because at the end you see Watts try to grab Rosalind's hand and she kind of shies away, and it kind of seemed like to him, like his idea of love was so powerful that like he was trying to. Am I explaining this at all? Does this make sense?
He was trying to connect with her.
Because for him, in his real life, love is the most important thing.
Right.
And when you find someone, you have to hold on to them. So he didn't like the idea of tampering with the past to mess with something. Whereas Rosalind had faith that if they were supposed to be together, they would. And if they weren't, it would work out anyway. He'd have new memories that would form.
Right.
And would still satisfy. So I thought that was interesting, how he was so tied to love.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know. It was more. She had more faith in things working out than he did, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a case of love is perfect, but not necessarily unique, or something like that.
Yes.
It was her kind of.
Yeah, that was hers, and his was like, if there's one person, once you find them, you can't mess with that.
Right.
So, yeah, that was an interesting plot, character development for those two.
And how interesting to have faith that both of them were going to follow their dream. That this one moment in their life changed them both. And that they would both follow this goal. Take away the meeting in high school, and suddenly they both follow their dream and come to where they're supposed to be, and actually almost make that dream come true.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the whole end of the game kind of fell apart for me.
Really?
Because, I mean, what we're looking at here is a guy on his deathbed, and it's like all of the things that are going on, like the whole part with NASA.
Mm-hmm.
It's like that. What's actually going on here? He's experiencing these fake memories.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
To what end?
To what end?
Yeah,
that seems a
like
really strange question.
Well, I mean, it's like a the amount of time is so short, and what are you actually doing here? Rewriting your final memories? Like, I don't know. I'm just thinking, like, my notion of death is when I'm on my deathbed, I will be thinking about the things on my life and not wanting to change them, just kind of objectively viewing them as things that are part of me. Like, I would not want a fake past to reflect upon.
Well, he doesn't know it's a fake past. He wanted his ideal wishes to be fulfilled. So when he's looking over his life, his life is complete in his eyes, as opposed to, I wish I had done that differently.
Right. So it's kind of a tale of rewriting the past.
Yeah. Well, he didn't.
Yeah.
He didn't know this happened. Like, he wouldn't be conscious of signing up to have his memory changed.
Mm-hmm.
So his memory is now, flying to the moon with River. Like,
Mm-hmm.
that's what he wanted.
I see.
And connecting in a deeper level than he did in his real life.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess that's just kind of, that feels kind of hollow to me.
Well, it is.
Yeah.
That yeah, I mean, I think it's supposed to be hollow. I mean, what is a person besides their memory?
Mm-hmm.
And I guess that's the question you ask: is it their actions, or is it what's in their head? And it's like,
Right.
ultimately for Johnny, it's more important what's in his head.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter that it didn't actually happen or not.
Right. Yeah, I mean, in that sense, it felt like it was more, well, I mean, it doing what a story should. It's more about what watching this story unfold does to the people around you, as opposed to, how it impacts him. I don't know.
I don't know. I think it's really interesting thematically in the sense that, isn't part of the human condition wondering how things would have been different only if you'd made a different decision.
Yeah.
Or only
like
if things hadn't happened the way they did. Maybe I'd be much happier now.
If you could go back and do it a different way,
Yeah.
now that you know what that one branch of the circuit.
Yeah, I mean,
leads
in
to.
a sense, it's kind of like the opposite of It's a Wonderful Life, or something like that. Instead of taking that reflection and looking at how like life would have been worse,
Mm-hmm.
Had you been somebody different. This is something different and a lot more human to me, which is looking back on your life and getting the chance to do those things over again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I don't know. I think it's.
I guess my problem there is it didn't lead to a change for anybody, or it didn't lead a change to Johnny. Say, he ultimately just kind of died with a morphine drip almost.
That's true. I mean, but again, as Tom points out, isn't our experience what's in our head?
Yeah.
I mean, if his dying experience is different than what objective reality was, and that, I don't know, like, is that such a bad thing?
Well,
Is that shallow in some way? I don't know that it is.
I think, I mean, for me, the reason the ending was so powerful is that it sort of like spoke to this larger theme of the power of regret in the game. Because obviously, a game where the basic conceit is fulfilling a man's dying wish, regret is obviously going to be the most dominant theme there, because they never, accomplished what they wanted to accomplish in life.
Mm-hmm.
Although you could obviously make the argument that Johnny's wish of going to the moon wasn't really what he wanted to accomplish. So for me, it's that it's kind of exposes regret as this, useless, futile thing that's not going to be worth anybody's time, because the two endings aren't really all that different. In one, you have this ideal scenario where they reunite, they're meant to be together, and he fulfills his dying wish. Mm-hmm. In the other one, you have him not really fully understanding the way his wife is trying to communicate to him, the way his wife is trying to tell him how much she cares about him by, compulsively folding these rabbits. In the end, they're still together. She still loves him. They're not technically together in the end because she died some time ago. But, she loves him, and like he sort of sees through the unfolding process of these memories that, she cared for him
she
all
did
along.
Actually.
Right.
Yeah, I guess my question there was, did he actually see through? Like, was he viewing it along with Watts and Rosalind? No, you're shaking your head.
No, no, in the sense that he's not consciously apart, because it's obviously memory Johnny that they're sort of like tugging along through this adventure. But I don't know.
There are unsolved complications that you have to wonder, like, is the idea of memory, because you and I, when we look back on memories, we have sort of a memory bank, right? Mm-hmm. Like, we can go back. It's not we have to go through them in order. We can reach back and pick out different memories no matter where they are. So there was this sort of question for me, like, okay, so we experience this in kind of a linear way, where we go back, and then when we finally watch them get to the moon, they reach across and hold hands, and it's one of the most incredible moments in any game ever. But you do have to wonder, like, is this the last thing Johnny is remembering, or is there a whole bank of memories that came after that was changed that we'll never get to experience, but nonetheless was part of Johnny's dying experience? That did sort of cross my mind, because I assume that his memory, like, it's just a whole change of a memory bank, as opposed to now he's going to re-experience them in a linear way, because that would be a whole new lifetime to experience.
Yeah, I guess you have to have one last memory. And I guess the way I interpreted that final scene was when he died, what he was thinking about. But
totally that. Yeah. I suppose in the end, like this, trying to analyze it too much is probably a moot point.
Yeah.
But going back to, you said, did Johnny realize what was going on? Was he able to go view with this? But what they accomplished was the thing that was stopping him in real life from like experiencing life was the beta blockers when he was like 8 that was forcing him to forget all of these things, and it changed him forever. They eventually essentially circumvented that, so he had like a normal memory flow in his life. I think that was the thing. So he didn't have, in his altered mind, he didn't have these emotional problems that were hurting him in real life. I think that's how I interpreted that. I don't know if that's true or not.
Yeah, and I guess it's kind of curious to think about whether, I guess the impression that I had was, instead of having the good and the bad memories, the bad memories that make the good memories really good, it just kind of came off to me as all he had were these good, perfect moment memories.
I think that's more the idea of how a 4-hour game has to be set up, though. In the end, our experience is that the sappiness is offset with the humor between the two doctors. So, but looking at like how much purpose would that really have served for us to see, once Johnny's past was changed, to see less happy thoughts? Would that really have served much purpose, or would that have just ended up being superfluous padding in a game that didn't need it?
Yeah, I don't know. It might have done something for me.
Also, when you're looking back and you don't remember good and bad, that's not necessarily how it is. You might just focus on the good side.
Yeah,
so it kind of makes sense that he would focus on the good.
I guess memories are associated by emotion rather than chronology. What the hell did you just
I tapped the thing. Let's forget about that.
Man,
his glasses on the microphone.
I think the idea of a memory bank is something that's very deliberate, and it's a part of the game, because there's an exchange between Watts and Rosalind, right? When they get to NASA, and they're like, oh, is this what NASA really looks like? And they're like, no, probably not. It's what Johnny remembers or thinks NASA would be. And it's the last memory that we experience as the player. But I'm almost positive that there would be other things in his life, and because everything kind of puts itself in line.
Mhm.
Because all they did was basically they went in his past and they connected these events and they fixed that. And then the rest of his memories kind of played out automatically, like a domino effect or something.
Right. And that's, that domino effect, I guess, is kind of interesting, where it's like you can't really, I don't know. I guess I'm still just I'm having trouble getting over this idea of like, this is so unethical, the changing of memory. Like, memory is inviolable. You can't, it's sacred.
It's not unethical if somebody hires you to do that.
I don't know.
Well,
I feel
it's a very similar
you
concept.
Need to save the person from themselves at that point.
Yeah, well, I mean, but why? What? But yeah, but this is a similar setup to what Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind was, but it's, I guess that has a more tangible result because he's not dying. But yeah, I mean, if you sign up for something, it's,
Yeah, I guess.
I mean, there are definitely different ways of looking at that, I guess.
So should we? The one thing about this game that really kind of bothered me, actually, I don't know if it bothered me so much as it was it could have been done better, was the puzzles. So between each memory jump, you have to solve these. What kind of puzzle are they?
Flip puzzles?
Flip the piece puzzles.
Yeah.
Yeah, you flip a row or a column.
Those are so innocuous, though.
Yeah.
Those bother you?
So the reason why they bother me initially, I spent on the very first puzzle, I spent about 20 moves because I was like, I don't really get what I'm supposed to do here.
Okay.
And then that started to stress me out a little bit because it had this ticker at the bottom where it's like, total moves, and I felt like a retard if I wasn't. Sorry, should I not?
That's the second GameSpot show in a row in 2 days that somebody used the R word.
Oof.
All right, like a dude with Asperger's, or.
Oh, now cut. Now, okay.
Too soon. Too soon.
Yeah,
Okay.
cut.
I felt like I was
ridiculous.
a moron, kind of, because my number was so high.
Okay.
And so that part was just kind of stressing me out a little bit. It was creating this tension inside of me of, this is a super compelling story, and I want to keep going back. But at the same time, it's like I don't want to deal with another one of these memory puzzles because, it's creating this weird tension in me. So
to me the puzzles felt like the game would still be just as effective if those puzzles weren't in there at all.
Yeah. But I'm saying they could have made this really good if they were purposely doing it to kind of create this effect of, trying to feel dread over digging up the past. Like, I got the sense kind of that, I'm hitting all of these painful memories along this guy's life, and the puzzles I felt were creating this, like, I don't know, like going, continually hitting another painful memory and another painful memory and another painful memory. That's kind of like a dread to me. And the puzzles, when they were still challenging, or when I was still trying to get a feel for them, they were playing into that. Like, they were enhancing that.
So you want the puzzles to fit more thematically into the story.
Yeah, and I wanted them to continue to scale, to get difficult.
I feel like those puzzles were included in there as a palate cleanser.
Yeah.
To sort of like give you a little timeout from the story. Sort of just a moment to let to collect your thoughts and just do something that doesn't require a whole lot of mental faculty.
Yeah, because by the end
I feel like that's the point of those puzzles. I mean, ultimately, those puzzles were harmless, and they're just kind of like there as like a bookend between chapters. I mean, yes, it would be great if they served some sort of story value. But the story was great enough on its own that I don't think it was really necessary.
I think they served as a nice coda to the end of each mini chapter. Because they really do signal this is the close of this stage of the life, and now we're going to move backwards to the next. And I think the vibe was right in terms of the way the presentation handled it, with the the little computer language and stuff like that over on the left, and I could have done. I don't know that the game would have been stronger without them, or that the game would have been weaker without them. I think the game is exactly what it is with them. That sounds like a really stupid thing to say, but I think it worked, and it worked well. I don't know that zombie shooting, on the other hand, was the best thing to do.
That was the one part that I genuinely did not like.
Yeah, I did not like that either.
The action scene toward the end. I almost like, I don't know why that was included in the game. Maybe just to make it a little bit more of a video game in quotation marks,
Right.
but it was pretty unnecessary.
I think they tried really hard to, kind of make the gameplay serve the story in certain places. And I think this was an attempt to make gameplay serve the story. I don't think this was necessarily meant to make it more gamey as much as it was to give a game element to something that they thought might have fit thematically. It just didn't work. But there are other times where I think it did work better. For example, when they become headless and they float around in that little area and you have to do the matchy. Again, not a difficult puzzle, but I think that did work for me, even though it was, again, an easy kind of puzzle, because I think it fit the vibe and I think it made sense. I think the horse riding thing
was really well done.
Was pretty well done. I mean, a few people pointed out, like, it was kind of easy if you didn't stumble upon the right thing you needed to stumble upon for that section to sort of draw out longer than it needed to.
I was literally lost on horseback.
Yeah.
I didn't know that I needed to run into Watts to free him from his horse prison.
It took me a couple of minutes, and I was like, I probably should rescue him. And I didn't realize I was going to trigger anything.
I thought I was supposed to, like, chase him or something like that. I didn't realize I had to actually, like, go head on into him.
Well, it was kind of a weird thing because this game does a really good job of showing you where the next point you're supposed to go is, and I felt that scene in particular, I didn't know where I was supposed to go, and because he was like running all over the place. So I feel like that was one scene where I felt like they didn't do a very good job showing me where I needed to go.
He spelled out initially, "Help me," and then when she gets on the horse, she's like, "Yeah, I guess I should help him," like that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I mean, they explicitly said what you needed to do. I wasn't sure if that was what was going to trigger the next thing. I just knew I needed to do it at some point.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, the fact that it didn't land for me and it didn't land for you probably signifies that there was something off.
Yeah,
there.
it could have been more overt. Yeah.
No, I agree. It could have been more over, but I do think in general that worked. And how awesome was the point where you think it's about to become an RPG and then it doesn't?
Oh my
god,
that was the ultimate gameplay serving the story
That was the
moment.
Comedic zenith of the game.
That was really good.
In an otherwise very funny game. I mean, the game has some very funny dialogue, but that was just like brilliant.
What did you choose?
I chose Other Shoe.
Oh, okay. I went with regular old shoe.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I did too.
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah, I went with regular shoe.
Yeah, that was definitely one of the.
That was. Well, I mean, and that. It's a very serious game, but it's also a very self-aware game.
Right.
Like you're playing this, and like, I mean, the guy who developed this knew. All right, people are gonna think this is a 16-bit Japanese role-playing game. Let's play with their expectations a bit. And it's done
totally.
in such a wonderful way. It's just a great way of addressing the issue. Hey, yes, we have the aesthetic, but what I'm about to give you is a completely different experience.
Yeah.
Brilliant stuff.
And that experience is, I mean, there's very little gameplay here. It's nearly all story.
It is. And the gameplay to me is it is at its best when it's connected in the story in some way. Like I felt like most of the memory artifacts that you find are kind of throwaway. They don't really like I mean, there's the one or two that really resonate, but most of them are just kind of like there.
Yeah. Well, it's what the pickles, the platypus.
The platypus. And for me, one of my favorite moments was when Watts kind of makes this throwaway offhanded comment. Oh man, I love how that platypus is always there for a free memory artifact. Right. And then you're like, oh, that's true. And then it sort of hits you a second later that platypus plays a significant role in the relationship between these two characters.
There are no accidents in this game.
Yeah.
And it's funny because oftentimes you can look at a heavily plotted story, and a lot of times you lose emotional connection when a story is so heavily kind of thought out that way. Like they often come across as spreadsheets of story rather than as actual storytelling, like when there's so much plot involved. But this is one of those, to me, there's so much heart that you don't see it that way, and then it becomes about rethinking the game now once you're done. And how awesome is the structure, by the way, when you start to think about it? Because one of the things that struck me is you start from the most recent memories and work your way back. And it really does impress upon you when you tell a story that way. First of all, it allows you to build mystery by making allusions to parts of life that don't come clear until later. So it's a really great way of telling a story when you want to build mystery and then lead to the beginning of that mystery so that you understand it. Like at first it's little things like the identity of Anya. Like, who is Anya? What does that mean?
Actually, can we start? Well, we can come back to that.
Okay. Yeah, but then it becomes more like you learn that River has a condition, but you don't know what that is. There's discussion, and you go further and further. And what's even better, the game never explicitly states it.
Yeah, I actually really like that part because earlier, at some point earlier in the story, Google him or something.
No, yeah, it was a book.
Yeah,
like, helping her deal with her illness.
Yeah,
and I looked it up.
And then later on,
Yeah, I actually looked it up too.
I think I looked it up for you, Kevin.
Oh yeah, I think you did. Van's desk is right next to mine, and I didn't want to leave the game to look at my browser.
All right.
Kevin Googled it on Yahoo.
I Alta Vista'd the crap out of that.
But then so that kind of trains you. Like when that name comes up, Tony Atwood. Then you know. Like I went to Wikipedia. Who's Tony Atwood? Oh, he's a pioneer in Asperger's study.
I mean, at that point, you already kind of know.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
And then so you start with the small mysteries like who is Anya. And then you move on to larger larger stuff like what's going on with River. And so it sets up this, this gradually deepening mystery of why did Johnny want to go to the moon, which is the game's biggest mystery. But then you get to bigger stuff like and the moment you get to that car crash, I was sort of sitting flabbergasted at my desk watching this scene unfold, and it's amazing how this
should
really
specify not the car crash at the very beginning.
Not the car crash at the very beginning. This is
It's
the
more
car
of a-
accident when Johnny's brother is hit.
Oh,
Is hit and died. And I keep going off on tangents. I'm really sorry, but then that brings to mind like when in other parts of the game when you see Johnny's mother and she's like off her rocker and she refers to Johnny as Joey.
Right.
You realize like what that means.
Yeah,
when you
a depressing
go back and
revelation
and look at it. But then, I just love the way this story is structured because you sort of go back and then you hit that hurdle. The two doctors have to overcome the hurdle to get further back. But there's something incredible about the way the game leads up to this idea that some of the most important events of your life are some of the earliest. And
that's super Freudian. Like
yeah. But then because it tells the story backwards, it allows that moment to become the climax and the culmination of a life.
Yeah.
And then they start working forwards again. I don't know. There's just something really brilliant about the structure of the story that I appreciate more than
it's definitely something
anything.
That's very difficult to do. Like Memento did it pretty well, but you really you don't see that kind of construction all that often.
Well, it's tough to do it because they have to like piece along a mystery, like Kevin said, but they can't frustrate you by like being like obfuscating what's going on. So they have to speak naturally and give you enough clues that you're still hooked without telling you. And they just did it so masterfully in this.
Yeah, definitely. But to get back to Anya, what was the significance of that name? Like this is something I actually don't know.
Oh, the name itself?
Yeah, like why did they end up naming the lighthouse?
It's an anagram for yawn.
Jan.
Well,
seems fair.
Yeah, with two N's.
Well, it doesn't have to do with
or two A's.
When you go back to the stargazing scene, and the whole discussion there was basically River thinks that the stars are all lighthouses, and one day she wants to befriend one of them.
Oh,
so they befriend one of them.
She had
so they give it a name because it's a
the name
a
itself doesn't mean anything, but yeah, she wanted that relationship to a star basically.
But what?
Right. Well, and I mean and just to sort of like elaborate on that, these are lighthouses that are billions of lighthouses that exist in space, and they shine a light on each other, but they can never like come close to one another because they're separated by millions of miles. And so it's
all thematically appropriate.
Right. Yeah. And so it sort of like ties into her wish that Johnny builds the house there so that the lighthouse is always close to somebody, that they're never separated. And it's just, it all fits into that sort of same theme.
And of course, by that time in his life, he's completely missing the relevance of all of
yeah,
this.
he has no idea why he needs to build this house next to the lighthouse, but there it is.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's almost like she was wanting him to be her lighthouse, kind of, but because he just was not getting it, she had to actually get, an actual lighthouse,
right? And name it Anya, because it's just a pretty name.
There's more to it, I bet, though, because here's something that was brought up to me by none other than Chris Waters, I think. When I talked about River having Asperger's, he made what I wonder is a relevant point about a character of the same name on Firefly, who has the same kind of behavior patterns and the same kind of, it's called something different.
Wait, the same name as River? Or?
Yes, there's a character named River in Firefly who also has the same kind of, obsessive, emotionally distant behavior.
I mean, it's this is a guy who's, throwing all sorts of pop culture references at, I think I would say that that's a logical assumption that it was named after that character.
Yeah. So if anybody has any ideas on what the signiance of the name Anya might actually have, feel free to let us know.
Go ahead, write in.
We would
love to hear who is Anya? Tell us.
Can I make another point too?
I could
to talk about this game all day. I'm sorry to monopolize.
It's a very good game.
There's the two points I wanted to make. One is somebody had come up to me and Van. Who was it that came up to you and I and talked about Johnny being selfish?
That's Curtis said.
It was Curtis. That's right. Curtis said that he didn't think that he didn't like the character of Johnny because he felt that Johnny was selfish. And
I didn't like the character of Johnny either.
And it's really interesting though, because one of my favorite scenes in the game is a conversation between Johnny and a friend of his and Rivers, who also suffers from Asperger's. And this is actually a side character, but it has some really important things to say in the game. And one of them is this confrontation that they have outside of this house in the process of being built. And Johnny has to decide, River at this point is dying. And she wants to spend their money not on getting her better, on medicine that would get her better or treatment. It is to finish the house. And Johnny is very upset by this, and he intends to tell her that they can afford both so that he can save her life. And their family friend, who also has Asperger's, says to him, that's really selfish. Because she's looking at it from purely an analytical point of view. And he says, haven't I earned the right to be selfish? And that is, to me, one of the most memorable moments in the game because it's very human. Like, this is the way you imagine somebody would feel and the way you would imagine somebody would talk about this event. Because you think of the idea of saving someone's life as selfless, but instead there actually is this selfish element to it. And he says very clearly, I think I've earned the right to allow myself to be selfish and to keep River alive.
Yeah, and it's really interesting too, because it's like he is spending so much effort trying to make her happy when the only thing that will make her happy is completely within his power, but he doesn't realize it. And so he's like toiling and toiling and toiling for really no effect. So he feels like, he's been giving away so much of himself and he deserves to be selfish at that point. When in actuality, it's like you were toiling for naught. Like there was, you actually don't have that entitlement almost.
Right.
Did you have another point?
There was, and it was sort of in the same area. I like reading the game's official forums and reading people talk about like what they brought away from the story. And there was a thread in there that somebody actually essentially asks, is it implied that Asperger's is somehow killing River? Because we know that River is dying, but it's never explicitly stated what she's dying from. And I don't think it's really relevant. I think that's why it was never explained, because in the end, it's irrelevant why. We just know that she is. And somebody took away from that, which at first seems something very silly, which is, is it being implied that Asperger's is killing her? Because, of course, Asperger's doesn't kill people. It's not that kind of affliction. But then when you think about it, think about this from a different angle. In the end, isn't there sort of an implication that Asperger's did kill her? Because it is her state of mind and the way she thinks, and the purely analytical way she thinks, that somewhat leads to her decision to want to keep the house and to want, Johnny to continue to live in this house and at this lighthouse.
Right. To put the money into the house rather than
her treatment.
Medical treatment. Yeah.
Right. And to me, there is sort of an implied idea that, yes, perhaps Asperger's did in the end at least is partially responsible for her death.
Yeah, and my initial reaction when they were initially laying it out was she had kind of committed suicide, because it was the way Johnny phrased it was, this was so preventable. I don't know why she did it. So it seemed like the choice was hers to make, but but in actuality, yeah, it could have been the Aspergery element of it. I don't know if Aspergery is a real thing. That might be completely insensitive. Sorry if you have Asperger's.
There's what's the other conversation that their family friend has with Johnny when she's not there, who sort of discusses, how, because she's dealt with it from so early on, she kind of learned. Does anybody remember her name, by the way? Was it Elizabeth or was it?
I think it was Isabella.
Isabella,
right.
And she's gotten to the point where it's almost like she's completely lost herself.
Yeah.
In adulthood, because she's learned from such an early age how she's supposed to act, that she doesn't even remember how she naturally would be anymore. Did that strike anybody else? I was really struck.
Well, that was
by that whole sequence of dialogue.
Wasn't it that character was the same as the one who was talking to, was her
selfish?
Yeah.
The selfish conversation was the same character.
Okay. Yeah. I don't know. Does anybody?
I think that character serves an interesting function in the plot in that she's sort of an analog for what River could have been.
Okay.
If River was able to, if they found out about this disease early on and she was able to treat it, what would their relationship be like down the line if she was able to communicate more effectively? And it's this kind of interesting, this sort of like morbid thought that yes, maybe she would be able to communicate more effectively, but she would be denying herself on a daily basis.
Right.
She wouldn't, because you get the sense that Isabella is a very conflicted person. Like, yeah, this is how I act and this is how people expect me to act, but I'm not my true self anymore. And I have to constantly go out there every day and put on a mask, put on this happy smiling face, and it's like you get the sense that it kind of tears her up inside.
Yeah, and it's kind of weird also because it seems like Johnny wants his wife to be like that.
Right, exactly. So it's and it sort of like goes back to that point that I was trying to make earlier, where this is a game that sort of like exposes the futility of regret, and that it's never really something that's worth your time.
Yeah. See, I thought that scene also tied into the greater societal pressures that everybody faces, whether you have Asperger's or not, because we all conform to a certain extent. We all are push aside certain elements and make other ones more apparent in who we are, and I thought that's kind of what it was talking about also.
Yeah.
The neat thing about Izzy that I thought was actually she's also an actress, I think it says in the game, and so she's acting professionally, she's acting in real life, and she says like the Asperger's was a reason why she did that, but also she also goes out and says that she both admires and feels sorry for River, just because she's been able to live her life like the way who she is, the way she was born, but at the same time, she's able to live her life.
Yeah, well, it's like people don't know how to relate to her, so that's kind of the part that she feels sorry about. It seems to me. So one other subject that I want to touch upon.
The grease fire.
The grease fire.
Yeah.
It was really tragic at the end.
It was.
That house just freaking burned down.
Well, they foreshadow it. Like, they have that moment where River says, God, I hope I don't die in a grease fire.
Right. And all that paper as well.
Plus, there's that whole mini game where you're like taking the fire extinguisher. And,
Right. And you start dumping milk all over everything. And just
beautifully done.
Oh, please.
But, no, the point I wanted to bring up was, so I've been playing Skyrim also as well. And
the inevitable comparison between these two games.
Very similar games.
Very similar
games.
But what occurred to me when I was playing this game was how much I dislike Skyrim's storyline now. Because in this game, it's a pleasure to talk to people.
It spoils you.
And
it spoils you for narrative in video games.
No, definitely.
Yeah.
And talking to absolutely nearly anyone in Skyrim is just like, this is dumb. this doesn't feel right.
This says so much more with so much less than other games.
Yeah.
And I mean, couldn't you lob that same critique at any other game besides Skyrim?
You could.
Will lob. I'm only using Skyrim as the most pertinent.
You could have been
example.
playing anything right now, and you would have said.
I mean,
that.
this is the reason why I don't like most games, is because I feel like
You're what?
oh yeah, I don't like most games. That's true. Because I feel like they're just so, I don't know. They're not going in the right direction. They're writing the sci-fi fantasy novel that doesn't really have any bearing or illuminate the human condition at all. Like they're just not deep. And I feel like there's so much potential for the shallow blockbuster experience, but also just like the actual literary experience of it. And I don't know. I mean, this is spoiling, as you said, the rest of games for me. Anything?
Well, I mean,
I agree.
I feel like that's an issue with any medium where you're going to find more interesting stories in games or in stories that are told by a smaller number of people because it's a more personal sort of method of storytelling. Games that are saddled by massive budgets and 4-year-long development cycles,
Right.
they're not going to tell such interesting stories because
They have to be vanilla to a certain
they have
extent.
to be vanilla. They have to appeal to the widest possible audience to get a return.
But can you
on that
imagine,
investment.
Can you imagine a story like this in Skyrim or one of these huge, massive games? Like, it would just be so awesome.
It seems like it would be possible.
I don't see why
I
it's
know
not
exactly
possible.
what you're saying,
Yeah.
but it's like, why can't you? I mean, there's been big movies that have emotionally impactful stories. I don't know. It's just, I think that's.
I mean,
a
certainly-
cop-out excuse, I guess.
Certainly, you do have, from time to time, you have like really big games that tell great stories, like The Witcher 2, for example.
BioShock comes to mind.
Yeah, BioShock absolutely comes to mind, but those ones are definitely more the exception than the rule.
Yeah.
So I think if there's one lesson to take away from this, it is that you can absolutely find great storytelling in video games,
true.
impactful, thoughtful storytelling in video games. You just have to look in the right place.
Yeah, right.
You have to look at the indie development scene. Smaller downloadable games where you're not gonna buy a game that's gonna last you like 30 hours, but
Right.
for the 4 hours that it does last, it'll be
I mean, this game
amazing.
Is,
It also
this game is
seems-
more valuable to me than
Yeah.
in some of these $60 games.
It also just seems like, why are you making a game? And
Yeah.
and like this is a game that he wanted to tell a story, and the game is a vessel for that. BioShock is the same thing, Enslaved is the same thing, and that's why those stories are so good. Whereas when you play Bayonetta, you want to make a fun action game,
Right.
and then the story is kind of second, and that's the vast majority of games.
Yeah, I guess I'd like to see it the rule as opposed to the exception to the rule.
Yeah, I mean,
That
I
would
don't
be
think
nice.
there's a lot of people who making big time games that are storytellers at heart. And
Yeah.
I think that's what it is. I think what Michel Ancel probably is, and there's a few other guys like that just love to tell a story.
Ken Levine probably.
Ken Levine is obviously another one. But I think most of them got onto games because they wanted to do something cool from an action perspective, and that's where. But then Skyrim is, I mean, it's a story focused game. I mean, RPGs are.
I know. I
So
mean, that's the thing
there's-
about it. It's a story-focused game.
Yeah.
It's still fun. I really enjoy Skyrim.
Oh, yeah.
It's what I mean. It would just be
I-
so nice if it had something to say. I don't know.
Well, yeah, never mind.
Well, it's,
Skyrim is a setting-focused game. It's not a
That
story-focused
is-
game.
that is fair.
It's about
It's,
the world.
it's a story-heavy setting-focused game. How about that?
that works. That's
Concise?
a perfect thing.
descriptive.
There's a
I
lot
like
of
it.
story.
Yeah.
But this is interesting because I want to compare, because I think most of us got weepy. Okay, I shed tears at least 2 different points in the game because I was
I got
Weepy.
a little misty.
I got a little misty too.
yeah.
Same.
But compare this to a discussion we had in the office not too long ago about an event in Gears of War 3 that is supposed to have emotional impact.
Yeah.
And I don't. This is a spoiler cast for To the Moon, not for Gears of War 3. So I don't want to give anything away to anybody who hasn't played Gears of War 3. But there is a moment.
Grease fire.
It is a grease fire in Gears. Well, there's a moment.
Kind of is a grease
It is
fire.
kind of a grease fire.
There is a fire.
But there is
Or
a
oil fire.
there is a moment that is supposed to give you emotion and is supposed to have you care. And but the way this moment is told is in a very cliched manner in which the manner itself is set up already in our minds to elicit the emotion. So rather than earn the emotion,
Yeah, I was going to use the word.
It uses shorthand in order to evoke the tears rather than legitimately earning them.
It's
a trick. It's a literary trick.
Tragedy in and of itself is not sad, is not emotionally impactful.
Right.
And it seems like although a lot of games have the tragedy thing that most make you sad, it's
melodrama.
It's melodrama.
No,
Whereas
totally.
this, it's like you are invested. You are so when they reveal why he wants to go to the moon, it's like devastating.
It earned every freaking tear because it didn't manipulate. Now, granted, I'm easily manipulated. We just discussed yesterday Moulin Rouge and how it's my favorite movie of all time, and how I completely
It's pure
concede
manipulation.
that it's pure manipulation, and that's why it works for me.
Mm-hmm.
But what's great about To the Moon, and this is why I was curious for everybody else to play it, because I was the first person in the office to play it. I completed it, and then I told everybody, you have to play this game. Because there I am bawling, and I wanted to see who cried. I wanted to know, how is this going to affect other people as well?
Who is the heartless bastard in this office?
Curtis said.
I mean, we knew that. I guess we already knew that.
But it's the test.
You've seen what he does to
But,
puppies.
I mean, well, true. But I mean, Tom Magrino, you're about as heartless as I think of when I think of people in the office.
Yeah. No,
And,
I mean, see, I'm not actually heartless. I just need something that's worth.
it needs to earn the tear.
Yeah, it has to earn it.
Yeah.
You know what's funny actually is that the most kind of like worked up I got was after I had finished the game. Like 3 days later, I went and I listened to the soundtrack and the main theme. I was just sitting at my desk and I was just getting goosebumps.
Yeah,
And
well, I've listened to that so many times. There's the theme where the two kids are playing together. It's
Mm-hmm.
For River, it's called, and it's just like every time I hear that theme,
it's
it's a good song.
And the guy who did the soundtrack was the same guy who wrote and basically made the game.
yeah.
Yeah. And that game would not be the same without that soundtrack, which is really
Ken
good.
Gao, I think
Yeah.
his name was.
Yeah.
I mean, it's absolutely, and that particularly that one refrain, because it is a theme in and of itself.
Yeah, and I pointed this out in the review, but I think it's worth noting a couple. There are two things that I loved about the way music is used in the game. One, I love talking about music in games.
This is going to be the last topic. This is the last
I'm
of it. We gotta
sorry.
no, keep going. But
I love
this
this game. I don't
podcast
talk
is a
about it.
quarter as long as the game is.
I know.
And we have so much more to talk about.
But here's two things that I love that I wanted to point out about the soundtrack. One is at one moment you go and you look at the musical score sitting on the piano, and it is the music for the music.
The sheet
you know what I
music.
mean? Like
Sheet
you
music.
don't really see that. You actually see actual sheet music for the music that you hear, which for me as a musician is very important because I'm very sensitive to any media that shows musicians or shows music in a very non-authentic way, which is pretty much almost everything. The other thing though is that I really appreciated because River's theme has this very repetitive sort of underlying aspect to it.
And they joke about that too in
Yeah.
the story. Yeah.
This
And-
is just one note.
Yeah, and that's really important because this is River's theme. And this absolutely ties to the compulsive nature of the character and the compulsive nature of the condition, you know, is that there is repetition. You see the repetition in the way she's making all these rabbits over and over and over again. This is inherent to Asperger's. And the fact that that then translates into her musical theme is effing genius.
Yes.
Absolutely effing genius. And none of us would have thought to do that. No other game developer would have thought to do that. So you know what? Hats off to this guy for knowing what he's effing doing.
Ken Gao.
Ken Gao.
Yes.
Ken Gao.
And this is part one of episodic content. So
Oh
we
yeah,
have
at the end we get a little teaser. But that is the end of this show. Van, thank you for showing up.
Hey.
We may have you back. Maybe. We'll see what
Aw.
happens. Tom McShay.
I'm hoping the spoiler cast for Skyrim is also a quarter of the length of the game.
Yeah, well, that's happening.
30-hour podcast
That's
coming
happening on December 9th, so check in for that. It will be a live show, and we will be taking live calls, so you know, prepare those. I don't know. Sean McInnes.
Hey, thanks for having me.
No problem. Kevin Van Ord.
Go to Freebird Games site, buy
Yes.
To the Moon for $11.99.
And buy the soundtrack also.
Yes.
Is that $5?
All right, that does it for us, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. HotSpot out! And Shauna's doing something weird.
What am I supposed to be plugged into? Am I just wearing this for show?
Yep.
on my weird red eye.
Over on your right.
Oh man, did you get in a bear
Feel free to
fight?
zoom in on it.
couldn't sleep last night. Weird red sleepless eye.
God, never take trazodone. Anybody ever prescribed you some sleeping medication? That shit will fuck you up.
Yeah, look at that.
Wow.
Rich and compelling.
I'm gonna post a video of that.
No.
Are you okay, Sean?